I thank the chairman. Before I talk about this amendment, the gentlelady referred to the importance of having trees, and no one disagrees with that. I mean, yeah, I live in the Texas Hill Country where live oaks are something we try to figure out how to protect, especially, for example, when you have an ice storm earlier this year, and I don't know, you're out figuring out a way to go save your trees by cutting limbs and figuring out how to preserve the beauty that God gave us. Nobody disagrees with that. But the idea that a core responsibility of the federal government is tree equity is absurd, right? I mean, the state of Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world. We're perfectly capable of figuring out how to deal with trees. We don't have any money. We're $34 trillion in debt, $2 trillion a year in deficit spending, and we're talking about tree equity? What the hell are we doing? Like, that's the question here, right? Like, I love trees. I love live oak trees. Do everything I can to preserve and protect the environment in which I live, because you know what? This is a crazy idea. I live there. I actually like to fish. I like to live in clean air and clean water. I like to have an environment that's great to be in for my kids and my family. We had a Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act in Texas before the Environmental Protection Agency was even created here in this town. The fact of the matter is, we can do what we need to do to protect our communities without this place spending money we don't have to interfere with us. And yes, there are interstate issues we must deal with, and we can deal with those things. But the fact is, we can do these. This amendment that I'm offering prohibits any of the funding in the Interior and Environmental Appropriations Bill from being used to carry out President Biden's executive orders on climate change. These executive orders direct the EPA to wage its regulatory war on the United States energy production and the internal combustion engine. The fact of the matter is, there are ambitious efforts to convert our entire fleet of vehicles to have 2/3 of new vehicles be electric vehicles by 2032. Now, that might sound good in a little focus group in some Ivy League, cabal in Boston. But the idea of what this is going to actually do to hardworking Americans is something we ought to actually flush out for the American people when the average EV is $16,000 more than a vehicle with an internal combustion engine. Maybe we should talk about the racial justice issues of cobalt miners around the world who are being exploited in the Congo so that we can empower China by buying all of their batteries rather than producing American oil and gas. I mean, people think that all this stuff is an accident of what we're seeing unfold in the Middle East and what we're seeing unfold in Ukraine, while our prices are going up and while our national security strength is going down because we're pursuing this radical agenda. These things are all connected. So yeah, we should not be funding these radical executive orders that are destroying the American way of life and making it virtually impossible for people to figure out how to live their lives, while we pursue unicorn energy theories that we're going to be able to somehow magically produce power without the use of reliable power. And Texas has tons of wind and solar. Great. But we also have a grid that is decreasingly reliable, directly as a consequence of federal regulatory impact on our ability to manage our grid. That is wrong, and we shouldn't do it, and we shouldn't be funding continuation of it. I reserve.
Reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Maine seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. So we're only 14 days away from a government shutdown. And instead of focusing on keeping the government open, we're working on a bill that's going nowhere. The draconian cuts that are proposed in this bill violate the agreement reached by former Speaker McCarthy and President Biden, and that were memorialized in statute in Public Law 118-5, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023. We would not be teetering on the brink of a government shutdown if my Republican colleagues had held up their end of the bargain. Now, we are here today to protect the welfare of the American public, and we cannot close our eyes to the impacts of climate change, such as the drought, flooding, severe storm, and wildfire events we are experiencing. As of October 10th, the United States has experienced 24 confirmed weather climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each. This is a new record. This amendment seeks to prohibit funding that will result in more resilient communities, mitigate the impacts of climate change, and protect our world for future generations. Not investing in strategies that minimize and prevent the acceleration of climate change, and instead paying billions in disaster relief shows my Republican colleagues are not thinking about what is best for the American taxpayer. Our economy, our health, our livelihoods, our food security, and quality of life all depend on healthy ecosystems. So I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, focus instead on addressing climate change, making our nation stronger, and our reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, yes, this bill returns the funding to the ever-efficient model of effectiveness of the 2018 federal government. Yes, it does back up the funding levels. And frankly, we ought to be doing it for more of our agencies. And we are trying to take those steps forward. And I'll say that unapologetically, because the American people are sick and tired of the federal government spending money we don't have to fund agencies that are directly at war with their way of life. And that's the truth. That's why gasoline is $1 more than it was before Biden took office, despite the fact the president has completely dumped our strategic petroleum reserve in order to try to preserve political benefits for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And that's just the simple truth. And everybody knows it. And yet we went around here ignoring the reality of what that means for the American people who are trying to get by every single day while the federal government is directly at odds with their ability to prosper, earn a living, pay their bills, pay for their energy, pay for schools,
time has expired.
Buy cars, and do what they need to do.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague on the other side of the aisle has proposed this bill that would really slash and burn so many of the important programs that our president has implemented to tackle climate change. And why did he have to do that? I've been in Congress for about 15 years, and I'm very fortunate to have served that amount of time. But since I came here, I have been dealing with colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have denied that climate change existed, who have done everything they could to support the oil and gas industry, who have pushed back on any kind of legislation or funding or anything we could possibly do to deal with climate change. And 15 years later, we're in a very serious situation. Now, my colleague is proud of saying it's a simple truth. It's a simple truth this, it's a simple truth that. But let me tell you a simple truth. Our planet is warming. We had the hottest summer on record. Oceans are heating. The polar ice cap is melting. We are in a very serious state, and most scientists will say things are happening much faster than we ever anticipated. And here we are having a ridiculous debate about something that's not actually going to go anywhere, and a bill that's not going to really happen, with a party on the other side of the aisle that wants to cut everything we've already done in the last 2 years to support funding for climate change. This is our responsibility. Our children, our grandchildren, you can say, oh, well, we're just going to handle it in my small town, in my small state. Well, I'm just going to explain to you that the planet is warming as an entire entity. And yes, we have to deal with foreign countries, but we also have to make sure that our country is on the right track, that we are investing in renewable energy, that we're not putting our heads in the sand and just ignoring what's going on out there, that all of these things are critically important. And we have to stop digging in our heels on every single bill and denying that climate change is real and making all kinds of crazy arguments about, well, it's India's fault or China's fault or America can't do it. You know, we can do all these things. We can manufacture the batteries in this country. We can manufacture the solar panels in this country. That's much of what we've done in the last bills, the infrastructure bill, the IRA, investing in our country, investing in American manufacturing so that this can be homegrown American energy. Every time you talk about gas prices, you refuse to acknowledge that we're trying to end our dependence on gas and oil. We're trying to make sure we are an energy independent nation. And yes, that takes a transition. But at this moment in time, we got to make those investments in the future. I've never seen a party so unwilling to invest in our economic future, to acknowledge what's actually happening in our daily lives and in our families' daily lives. And if you really listen to your constituents or took the calls or listen to what people are saying about their worries about the future, one of their greatest worries is what are we going to do about the warming planet? What are we going to do about the number of days when kids can't go outside and play because it's too hot? What are we going to do about making sure we're looking at our future together? That is not what you're doing here. You're just denying that climate change exists. You're denying that we have real work ahead of us and that we ought to be doing it together. So once again, I oppose this horrible amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm out of time. Yield back.
Time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the